And we're live. Tonight, coming to you live and direct from Sydney, Australia, and Okinawa, we welcome Dr. Andrew Gallimore as our guest. Now, Dr. Gallamore is a computational neurobiologist, pharmacologist, and chemist. He's currently at the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology, where he uses computational modeling to study brain function. He's collaborating with Dr. Rick Strausman of the University of New Mexico on a model for the application of target-controlled intravenous infusion for a prolonged immersive DMT psychedelic experience. Thanks for joining us live this evening, folks, for what promises to be an incredible insight into this amazing research and the possibilities that may come from it for humanity and consciousness. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Gallimore onto the Awakening Point. G'day, Doctor. How are you?
Thank you very much. Good to be here. Yeah, pretty good. It's getting pretty cold in Okinawa now, so kind of wrapping up for the winter. But all is good. All is good.
And we're pretty much sweltering here in Sydney,
Yeah.
Australia, with the heat.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
So looking at all of your qualifications, was this something that you worked on to get you to this point right from the beginning?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, when you say my qualifications, I guess we're going back really to high school. And it was really when I was maybe 14, 15 years old that I became interested in drugs generally, and specifically psychedelics. And this was why I originally went into studying chemistry and pharmacology. But then after that, I became more and more interested in DMT and specifically on its effects on consciousness and the way that it can change brain function and the way the brain constructs the world in such a astonishingly dramatic fashion that I moved towards, firstly kind of moved more towards biochemistry and then towards more neuroscience and eventually, to my position now where I'm sort of computational neuroscience. So yeah, I've moved through a number of disciplines, and it's kind of, if you're interested in psychedelics, unless you're a pure academic who's interested in head twitches in mice when they inject LSD or something like that, or interested in a very, very specific aspect of receptor pharmacology, you have to kind of straddle quite a lot of different kind of academic arenas, if you like, in order to find your footing. And I'm still kind of struggling sometimes, but yeah, I think I have a few ideas now.
You've certainly brought together a very unique set of skills and life experiences. I mean, when I first came across your work and your YouTube channel around about a year ago, I actually held off and waited until I really watched all of your YouTubes until I took the plunge myself with DMT. And I've got to tell you, your research and just your background and your knowledge has helped me so much take that step, and I know has helped so many other people. So I'm really looking forward to getting into it tonight.
Sure. Well, thank you very much. I'm glad that at least someone finds what I do interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of people that follow your work, Andrew. And you've got a book coming out next year, correct?
Yep. Alien Information Theory. There it is. It's the cover. Well, that's the working cover at the moment. But yeah, so yeah, I'm just kind of putting some finishing touches to the book, so that hopefully, by my birthday, which is February 25th. So that's a pretty good deadline for me, I think. I have to get it out there by then.
And how does a book tie in with the research that you're doing at the moment with Rick Strausman?
Well, okay, so it's in a way it's kind of fundamental. Or the work that I'm doing with Rick is kind of fundamental to the whole kind of the whole premise of the book. The idea that the DMT space is something to be taken seriously, and it's that these beings that you meet within this place that are actually conscious how, exist from their own side. A Buddhist once put it to me: nothing really exists unless it exists from its own side. And so, once you take this idea seriously, then you have to ask yourself, is the best that we can do is to kind of burst into this bizarre hyperdimensional domain where these beings are living out their lives in this vast, complex, hyperdimensional ecology, and spend a few minutes kind of looking around rather wide-eyed, and then to kind of disappear a few minutes later. It seems that doesn't seem to be the kind of the epitome of what we can achieve with this. And so I'm sorry, I'm just straying from the book slightly here, but so it kind of, I always felt that we could do a lot better. We should bring our best tools to the table. If we really think that DMT is this technology, and I use that word very guardedly, but very, very purposefully, if we really believe that DMT is a technology for accessing this kind of orthogonal dimensions of reality, then we have to bring our best tools to the table. And I always describe this attractive romanticism attached to the idea of sitting on a hand-woven rug and lighting incense and facing the North Star or whatever, and smoking DMT from a little glass pipe, and that's all very, very lovely, and it's certainly a very effective way to gain access to this realm. But we have the technology now to do so much better. And if there's one thing that you realize very, very quickly when you enter the DMT space, is that these beings are extremely intelligent. They're extremely advanced. They are, hyper intelligent. They're way beyond anything that could be even conceived of within our lower dimensional space. So it simply doesn't make any sense. All this mysticism and mythology that has kind of grown around DMT. DMT has been around as a pure drug for just over half a century. But already, particularly in the last 20 years, there's this kind of, I hate to say it, but it's kind of woo-woo kind of new age mysticism that's kind of caked itself around DMT. So people are very, very resistant sometimes to the idea of lying down on a gurney, essentially, and being injected with DMT for an extended period of time in order to gain extended access to the DMT space. However, for me, I see that as being the most ethical, the most conscientious, the most polite thing to do. If an alien being from an alternate reality burst into our world and then kind of looked around and poked at us a little bit and then, fucked off again, we might think, well, that was extremely rude. I think I don't see this idea, this aversion to the idea of needles and intravenous infusion. I don't see that as a valid argument against what I've proposed with Rick. So that's kind of, so that's the basic kind of the fundamental premise behind it, is that DMT could really be, or seems undeniably to be, an actual place populated by intelligences. So then that raises the question of, well, what is it? Where is it? How do we go there? What has DMT got to do with this space? How does DMT allow us to access this realm with such facility? How can we make sense of this? And so the book is really about taking all of my thinking over the last 6 years, really, or longer, really, but 6 years specifically, when I've been focusing specifically on DMT, and trying to form some kind of coherent explanatory kind of narrative on what I think DMT could be. That makes sense.
Just coming into contact with your work for the very first time, to me it felt like I was coming across the Apollo, missions going to the moon in the early stages. That's honestly how it felt to me. It's like, oh my God, like this could be so massive that we don't even realize how big it could be.
Oh yeah.
I mean, yeah, like, are you guys, like, what's the primary purpose that you've got on your mind, and maybe the expectations that you guys have in sending people to this dimension or realm or consciousness state for a prolonged period of time?
Sure. I mean, you know, there's no doubt. I mean, people have drawn the comparison before to the idea of NASA, and really, this is, in a sense, it seems like not that significant in one sense, that okay, you're giving someone a drug and for an extended period of time and they're tripping. Okay, so from the outside, that's very, very difficult to get your head around the fact that actually it's something much more profound than that, and something that's actually so profound that it's almost unthinkable. You know, the idea that we could actually establish communication with beings not from another planet, not from another star system, but actually beings that are from an orthogonal dimension of reality that we never knew existed, or certainly in the Western world, we never knew existed. That is far more earth-shattering than meeting extraterrestrials from, you know, a few light years away. You know, this is way, way beyond that. But the problem is you can't. It's very difficult to say that to somebody and have them take you seriously. It's not, you know, with the you know, space travel. You know, you see these rockets firing into space. You know, if a spaceship lands on the White House lawn, as people always talk about, you know, you're going to see that. Well, unless they cover it up, but anyway, it's a different issue. But you sure, you know, these are going to be here. They're going to be, you know, verifiable, objectively, demonstrably verifiable evidence. You know, this is Richard Dawkins kind of level of, you know, it cannot be denied. But with DMT, it's a whole different game, because you have to convince people that when you close your eyes and you're injecting DMT, that you're actually going to this alternate domain and actually communicating with other intelligent beings. So yeah, it's potentially extremely profound, far beyond. It would be the greatest discovery, by far, the most important, greatest discovery in the history of humankind. If somebody was able to, you know, establish beyond any kind of reasonable doubt that we were actually communicating with intelligences that are not of this not even of this universe. Yeah, so that would be the, you know, the philosopher's stone here. You know, that's who could dream of anything more important than that. But you know, I don't think Rick, bless him, I don't think he that's his. Well, maybe I should change it a little bit, but you know, I originally I kind of I dropped Rick an email. We'd communicated before, and I just said to him, because I'd had this idea that DMT, it has these strange pharmacological peculiarities that set it apart from other psychedelics. Some of them are very, very well known to everybody. The fact that it's very, very short acting, that there are pharmacological underpinnings for that. There's reasons why it's short acting. And also it's extremely non-toxic. You can give it repeatedly and not see any kind of toxic effects, even in overdose. But importantly, it doesn't have subjective tolerance. And this is something that Rick Strassman discovered back in the 90s. He injected someone with a DMT bolus every 30 minutes. He saw exactly the same level of effect on his rating scale. You know, the fifth time versus the first time was exactly the same. So it struck me that these are the kind of properties that you would want if you wanted to develop certain types of general anesthetic. So these are the drugs that put you to sleep, and there are many different types, and they all have different properties. But there's a certain type of anesthetics that's used in something called target-controlled intravenous infusion, and breaking that down a little bit. So target-controlled. So the target is the brain concentration of the drug. So obviously, if you want to put someone to sleep, You want to raise the level of this drug in the brain to a specific level, but you don't want to overshoot it. You overshoot it, then you can get toxic effects. You might stop them breathing, and if the level is too low, then they may rouse during, when you're cutting their chest open or something like that. So there is a window within which you must keep the drug. It's impossible to keep it perfectly steady, or currently anyway, but you can keep it within a window, kind of fluctuating, a therapeutic window, call it. And this is done using this target-controlled intravenous infusion. So you bring the drug to the target concentration in the brain, and then you use an automated infusion device to maintain entry of the drug into the bloodstream, but at a very, very carefully controlled rate, such that the level in the brain is maintained. And that's not straightforward. And even now, this is not a perfect technology. Even the greatest anesthesiologists in the world would never claim that, because the human body is very, very complex. And as soon as one of these drugs enters the bloodstream, things start happening to it. It starts being metabolized. It starts equilibrating with soft tissues. It starts equilibrating with small blood vessels. This is before it even gets into the brain. And then once it's in the brain, it starts to be metabolized as well. So keeping the level of the active drug constant in the brain is very, very difficult. But minimally, there are certain pharmacological properties of a drug that you want, and you want them to be short-acting so they don't accumulate. You want them to be non-toxic. You want them to not exhibit tolerance. It's no good if your anesthetic stops working after 2 hours because of tolerance when it's a much longer operation, something like that. So DMT actually has all of these pharmacological properties, presumably by accident, or just one of its essential features. So that made me think, okay, can we not apply then this technology with DMT? Why not? Why not bring someone into a DMT state, bring their blood DMT levels and their brain DMT levels to a breakthrough dose, so that they are at the level where they are fully in the DMT space, and then hold them there. So rather than the DMT going up like this and then kind of dropping that down rather quickly over a few minutes, it goes up and then it kind of settles out. And so after I had this idea, my first thing was to actually find some data. You need some blood data. You need to actually have data from somebody that has injected someone with DMT and then monitored the level of DMT in the bloodstream, so you can see rising and then falling. This allows you then to build a pharmacokinetic model, a mathematical model of the distribution and metabolism of DMT in the body. Then you can use that to simulate, first of all, a pharmacokinetic model that will basically allow you to work out what should the infusion rate be after we give an initial bolus of the drug, initial kind of large dose over 30 seconds. And then you have to carefully modulate the infusion rate in order to stop the drug continuing to rise in the brain, at which point people just black out, or dropping, in which case they come out of the DMT space. So you can use this pharmacokinetic model to actually develop this this kind of infusion protocol, as I call it. So this is when I got in touch with Rick, and I said, "Hey, Rick, do you have this data?" Because he did all of this back in the 90s. One of the things, his original kind of ruse, really, for doing his study was that he was going to get this, physiological data and effect on heart rate, kind of relatively uninteresting stuff. Of course, the really interesting stuff came out of the reports, which he published in DMT, the Spirit Molecule. But he did get this blood data. So, literally within sort of 30 minutes of me emailing Rick, he sent me these couple of old Excel spreadsheets and said, "There you go, this is what I've got." So that's really where it started.
Now, Andrew, for those of us who are lucid dreamers, and for those of us who, are regularly doing out-of-body experiences and stuff like that, I mean, what we're experiencing during this phenomena you know, looking at the environment, it looks far more high definition than the normal world. Yet the DMT realm is just like another level on top of that. To put someone intravenously in this environment for an extended period of time like that, I mean, I can't help but get excited just thinking about, you know, what are the differences there in what's going on in our brain?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of questions there. I think, yes, I mean, sending someone there, even for a couple of minutes, is still quite, certainly by intravenous injection, you know, a bolus of the drug, even for a few minutes is pretty shaking, to say the least. But yeah, for 30 minutes, for an hour, for several hours, yeah, you need someone who is very, very experienced and who can really kind of handle themselves in that kind of environment. But of course, it's the same. You know, if you put someone on a rocket and send them to the moon or wherever, you've got to have people who are prepared to handle these kind of G-forces, I guess. And so, in a way, it's comparable. Now, in terms of what's going on in the brain, this is a good question. I mean, why does the DMT space seem so much more kind of hyperreal? You would often describe it than this world. I don't think anyone really knows the answer to that question. What we do know is that it doesn't matter whether you are in this normal waking world, the consensus world as we call it, or whether you are in the DMT space. What we do know is that those worlds are always constructed from information generated by your brain. That's very difficult to deny. Well, for me anyway, you know, the way I understand things, that to me is axiomatic. You know, worlds are constructed by information generated by your brain under all circumstances. Now, that doesn't mean that all worlds are either equally real or equally unreal, because, for example, during normal waking life, yes, your world is always constructed by your brain, but it is modulated by information from outside your brain. So the sensory information that enters your brain, let's say so visual information, for example, goes through this walnut-shaped structure called the thalamus in the center of the brain, and then is passed to the primary visual cortex at the back of the brain, and then spreads through and starts changing the way that your brain is constructing the world. But the information from the outside world doesn't sort of enter the brain ever. It's not added to the information generated by your brain. Your brain is not a video camera. Your eyes are not video cameras. You know, your brain is really just being modulated by information that's entering the brain from outside. But always the world is generated by your brain. So you are in a sense, and other people have spoken about this, you are kind of living in a hallucination, but it's a controlled hallucination. And I think hallucination is probably a bad term because that kind of implies that there's something unreal about it. I never make that distinction between the real and the non-real. Between false perceptions. I call them non-adaptive perceptions rather than hallucinations. But in a sense, all worlds are equally real in that they are all built from the same prima materia, which is information generated by your brain. All phenomenal worlds I'm talking about here. So the subjective worlds that you experience. Now, how that relates to what's going on outside your brain is an entirely different question. But certainly, even when you are thrust into the DMT space, for you to experience that world must be constructed by your brain. The question then is there what we call extrinsic information that's entering the brain from some alternate reality? Because of course the brain can construct your world with almost effortlessly during dreaming, for example. So when you descend into REM sleep at night, the parts of the brain that normally receive information from the external world are essentially cut off from the outside world. You're going to shut down certain parts of the thalamus and also the front of the brain as well. But the parts of the brain that normally construct or generate the informational structure of your world are still functioning. So the world that you experience during a dream is, in a sense, identical to the world in terms of what it's made of, to the world that you experience during waking life. The difference is that when you're awake, there's an input from the external world that kind of modulates, regulates, controls the world that is constructed to make it a stable and predictable world that you can actually function in. It has to be a good, an adaptive world, a good model of whatever there is out there for it to be useful. So, we've evolved to generate this kind of world. But when you smoke DMT, something for me completely confounding happens. Is, your brain wasn't dropped to earth as this pristine world building machine. It evolved to construct this model of reality, and it did that, as I say, to generate a stable and predictable model of reality where you can make predictions, you can differentiate between predator and prey, and you can orient yourself and all the things that you need to do to survive and reproduce, which of course is what evolution is all about. This is the importance of this model of reality that your brain constructs. So your brain has learned to build the world essentially over many thousands of years, millions of years, really, if you want to go back that far. So what's confounding for me is that the consensus world is really the only world your brain should know how to build. And when you fall to sleep at night, even when you're dreaming, your brain tends to build a model of reality that is very, very similar, if not continuous with the waking world. And in fact, this is known as the continuity hypothesis of dreaming, which basically states that dreaming is continuous with waking. And amazingly, they've actually studied, people actually look at the phenomenology, the actual structure and content of dreaming. And they've actually measured the amount of time you spend watching television or talking on the telephone, mundane daily activities during dreaming. And they found that it's almost the same kind of proportion of time that you spend doing that in waking life. So, in your dream, you tend to, there are exceptions for sure. Dreams can become bizarre and they're certainly more fluid because they're not modulated by information from the outside world. But your brain tends to build this world because, as far as I'm concerned, or as far as I was concerned until I discovered DMT, this is the only world your brain knows how to build, and it's very fucking good at it. So the question is, how the fuck, when you smoke DMT, does your brain suddenly know how to construct this, astonishingly complex, bizarre, hyperdimensional, hyper-technological environment, replete with extremely intelligent entities? Where did that come from? Where the fuck did all of this come from? That to me is just, it's very, very difficult for me to explain. And certainly from an orthodox neuroscientific perspective, for me to say, it's very easy to sort of glibly say, oh, it's just a hallucination, you're hallucinating. But I'm sorry, but that's not good enough, because these worlds are not maelstroms of confusion. They're not kind of twisted distortions of reality. These are highly complex technological worlds of crystalline clarity that have purpose, that seem like they've been there for far longer than this universe, and are populated, replete with this vast, complex ecology of extremely bizarre beings, often of intelligence that is way beyond anything we can fathom. So that to me is like, of course, until you actually smoke DMT and go there, you never really can understand that. People will tell you, oh, I met these beings, but they still think, oh, it's just a hallucination. You really do have to go there. This is why Terence McKenna always said, the only sure convincer is 5 minutes of your time. Give me 5 minutes of your time, and we'll see, what your response is after you burst into this domain and then come back shaking and awestruck.
I've been there, and I totally agree with you. It's definitely not. I would not call it a hallucination in any stretch. I mean, even the feelings, what seem like biological feelings of like when you go to a place that you haven't been to since you're a child, and you may smell something or feel the wind in a certain way, and it's just a feeling of nostalgia or something. This is there. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
even though you're like in a UFO or something.
Yeah, that's one of the more confounding aspects of the experience, is that it is extremely bizarre, yet there's this profound sense of deja vu. You know, I said it percusses deep at the center of your core of your being. This sense of profound deja vu. It's not like, oh, you know, this is familiar. I feel like, you know, I've been to this party before. No, this is something much more fundamental. And this is, for me, is really important, because what we know, I mean, even schizophrenics, when they might have very detailed and complex and convincing hallucinations, but when they recover, when they wake up, essentially through, you know, antipsychotic drugs, for example, they will recognize the fact that this was a hallucination. They say, oh yeah, I used to believe that, you know, they were poisoning my blood, but of course I was, you know, it was a delusion, or I used to believe this, or whatever. But with DMT users, they come back. They were told, okay, yeah, you've just taken the drug, but no, this was not a hallucination. You know, and there's the conviction, profound, you know, undeniability of the DMT experience persists even after you come back. It's not like waking up from a dream when you think, oh, that was an amazing dream. This is like, oh my God, I've just been somewhere and I cannot understand this. Yeah, so it's yeah, I would agree with you there, certainly. Yeah.
I read a book called Flatland once, and reading that book, Flatland, just before I went into the full breakthrough, and I was looking at what appeared to be the geometry of the room breaking apart, I immediately thought of Flatland and thought, oh man, I feel like the 3D guy trying to explain to people in the 2D world that he's seen a 3D sphere, and they all thought he was crazy and they wanted to lock him up.
Yeah. I mean, this is another one of these characteristic motifs, and within the DMT space is this hyperdimensionality. The idea that you see dimensions that don't exist in this world. You see all sides of an object at once. Everything, you know, that adds to the sense that this is not merely a complex or remarkable reality, but actually, you know, it strays into the impossible. It's an impossible reality. It cannot exist in our, you know, within the geometric constraints of our world, other than in complete abstraction. And even then, I think it might be very difficult. So yeah, you cannot explain to somebody, no more than a topologist could explain to you really the structure of some of these higher dimensional spaces that they work in. It's very difficult. You might get some pretty computerized imagery that's developed now. It gives you kind of an idea, but with DMT, it's very difficult to bring back anything other than a shadow of the experience. You know, to actually be in a 9-dimensional or 12-dimensional space, that is as ineffable as trying to describe the color red to a blind person. You know, the quality of a space is almost, you know, it's qualia. It's one of those features of consciousness that you only understand by being there. So as you say, you know, being in this flatland world wouldn't have any idea, even how to think of what was a sphere. That would be, you know, beyond their comprehension. And how would you describe it to them? You know, and certainly trying to describe 9-dimensional objects being tossed to you from across hyperspace by, you know, little elves. You know, how do you kind of reconstruct that in this 3-dimensional world, even in, you know, in language or in visual form, in any form? It seems it's completely beyond what we can do. Which again is another one of these features of the experience, which makes me think there's something more than just hallucination going on there.
So if we look at it like consciousness being fundamental, even in this existence, this DMT place or state, it's like it's just another dimension that somehow DMT's like some kind of a upgrade or something, some kind of a little thing that's been left here to let us communicate with it or something.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I've discussed in a couple of my papers, and it's something I actually take very, very seriously in the book. Is that actually, what if DMT really is an embedded technology? It's not simply, it's not a coincidence. I mean, there are many. We have to remember DMT is not the only naturally occurring psychedelic, but it's the only naturally occurring psychedelic that allows you to access this particular space. And some might say that's not particularly surprising. All drugs are different in their own specific way. But DMT it feels special in so many different ways in its ubiquity in the natural environment. I've always thought, if DMT was an embedded technology, it's not just presented to you. It's not like handing someone the book of Matthew and saying, you just got to believe, man, and everything's going to be fine. This is like you embed this message, you embed this technology everywhere in the environment. In basically, when you look out your window, there's probably half a dozen plants at least that contain significant quantities of DMT. So it's literally everywhere, and yet you cannot take DMT and access this place or use the technology simply by feeding. There's no way that animals will feed on these plants and find themselves in the DMT space, or humans, because you need to concentrate it, you need to extract it and purify it, and you need to ingest it non-orally. You can't just swallow it. You have to either vaporize it or now use either a bolus injection or this infusion methodology, which I'm proposing. So it seems like it's an intelligence test. The only people that are going to discover this technology are the people with the requisites and of cognitive sophistication to actually do the chemistry. And the chemistry, it's done in people's kitchens now. People extract from Mimosa hostilis root bark every day, and it's a thriving sort of underground clandestine chemistry community. They've actually done a lot of the work here, and that should not be underestimated. The importance of these people kind of working behind the keyboard, really, and often only to be seen in the DMT Nexus or in these various Facebook groups. But actually, to do that kind of chemistry, to extract a drug and purify it and work out how to administer it, and then to actually work out, I think what is the next step is actually to work out how to maintain a constant level in the brain, essentially hook someone up to the DMT space for an extended period of time. For me, that's a natural extension. I think, if DMT really is this embedded technology that allows us, essentially we're trapped in this lower dimensional space, and this technology has been embedded, and I think probably it was embedded waiting for some kind of intelligent species to emerge and to discover the technology, and then to work out how to use it and access this place. So that if you wanted to do that, if you were some hyper-intelligent, alien hyper-intelligence, that might be how you would do it. If you wanted to communicate and allow some kind of species to enter your kind of realm, your sort of container reality, using something like DMT might be the approach. So I do think it's a possibility. I mean, many people would disagree with me. A lot of neuroscientists, orthodox scientists say, we're totally in the realm of science fiction now, certainly. But as we know, anyone who's read P.K. Dick, knows that often a lot of these ideas, really could be true, and a lot of people do take them very, very seriously, including myself.
It makes a lot of sense, Andrew, because I mean, LSD and psilocybin seem like stencils that are placed on top of this realm. It's like a stencil type of feeling that hugs what's already here, where DMT is literally like another place.
Yeah.
I know that's not the best word, but it really does feel like another place. So it really does make sense that it could be some kind of a mechanism to make contact. And if that's the case, do you guys feel that there's any kind of, I don't know, like breaking of the rule set or something, like putting someone in there for that long to like establish some sort of contact with these beings?
Well, I mean, that to me, that would be the purpose of the game, right? You know, if you see, essentially, we would find ourselves within kind of this cosmic game, as I like to call it, because that's really what it is. You know, I don't take this reality seriously in that, you know, I don't make any kind of axiomatic judgments on what this place is or what our purpose of life is at all. And I certainly don't think we should, you know, in the same way that we would kind of mock people a few hundred years ago for thinking that the Earth was the center of the universe. So much so, we were thinking that the universe is the center of reality. I think we have to take seriously that there may be certainly beings far more intelligent than us in this universe, and to think what there might be outside the dimensional constraints of this reality is completely unfathomable. So yeah, I think I take that idea seriously. The DMT does seem to be it's a switch. It doesn't. It's not like kind of nudging the dial out of tune slightly. You know, psychedelics generally have a common basis. Certainly the classic psychedelics. So we're talking the tryptamines, the phenethylamines, so psilocybin, as you mentioned, LSD, mescaline, DMT. These are, you know, the big four, if you like, and they tend to, certainly in usual kind of doses. Firstly, they last a long time, hours, and generally they tend to cause a change in this reality. So it's kind of not a distortion. I hate that phrase. It's modulating the structure of this reality. So you get a world that goes from being stable and predictable to being unstable, unpredictable, and more kind of fluid. But DMT doesn't do that. It skips past that stage and takes you directly. It's like, instead of nudging the dial out, slightly out of tune, it actually flips it very, very rapidly with ferocious efficiency into a completely different channel. And for me, that's very, very difficult to explain unless that other channel is there, in a sense. And that would be this perhaps not necessarily, but perhaps it would be the reality from whence we are constructed. You know, we are living in a slice, essentially, a lower dimensional slice, in the same way that a flatland guy is living in a slice of a 3D world. We are living in a three-dimensional slice of a higher dimensional space. Now, that's very simple to say, and even to get your head around, that's quite straightforward. But what doesn't explain is how, what has DMT got to do with that? How does DMT, what is changing the brain chemistry and altering the dynamics of the brain got to do with communicating with this ultimate reality? And so this is something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about over the last few years, and really the book is all about that. It's trying to think about what is the structure of our reality, and what did psychedelics do when they enter your brain, and how can you relate that then to DMT as some sort of channel switch? And people use that word quite glibly. DMT is a reality channel switch, and this probably comes from Terence McKenna. He said DMT is a 100% reality switch, completely, and he was right. But and other people have written about DMT, switching the channel or tuning you to a different reality. And that's very simple to say using this kind of radio communications analogy. But actually say, okay, what's that? How's that actually working? What's actually going on in the brain for that to actually work? It's simple enough to say, the brain is not in certain in a certain way, yeah, you can probably compare it to a radio receiver, but not really. But you know, there needs to be some sort of neurochemical mechanism for whatever's going on, and so that's really what my kind of thing is. My back is to think about that. Is to think about how can we relate changes that are going on in the brain to actually interdimensional communication, the receipt of information from an alternate orthogonal dimensions of reality, basically.
And the fact that our brains even recognize this place or can make any sense of it in the first place is amazing. It's crazy.
Exactly. Oh, for sure. Yeah, that's the remarkable thing, is that it's not, you know, this maelstrom of confusion. Well, at first it is, but you kind of might expect that. You know, you kind of tumble through this rapid procession of very complex visual imagery. It's overwhelming. You're kind of tumbling through. Then you burst through into this space. And then you are there. You are undeniably there, and it is reasonably. It's stable. It's astonishingly complex and ever changing, for sure. But it's a place, and it exists, and there are things there, and they will communicate with you, and they will show you around. You know, it's not. You know, some people, some quite prominent people, really, I won't mention their names, within the kind of psychedelic community have said it's the brain trying to make sense of this kind of random disorganization of its dynamics. But I think that's facile. That doesn't get us anywhere. It's not the same. It's like, okay, if you twist your radio, going back to the radio analogy, you twist it out of tune slightly, you get a fuzz. That's fine. That's simple to explain. But then when it switches to another channel, there's got to be another channel there. You know, it's not just going to kind of make sense of this kind of static. And the brain, whilst the brain, of course, is not the same at all, and the brain does try and make sense of you know, the kind of information that it's generating and receiving, for sure. It always does that. The reason we see faces everywhere, the reason people sell images of Jesus Christ on crackers, is because we are certainly hardwired to see faces. You know, we see faces everywhere, and other structures as well. You know, but that doesn't necessarily reinforce the idea that DMT is a hallucination, because the brain in these places have no relationship whatsoever to what we would call consensus reality at all. You know, at all. Nothing that is from this world is there, and like nothing from that world is here. So that doesn't make any sense. Why is the brain kind of interpreting this so-called kind of random disruption of its normal kind of information generating machinery by interpreting this information as being these bizarre hyperdimensional realities, you know, full of intelligent beings? That doesn't make any sense to me. So yeah, it's more than that, for sure.
And Andrew, where are we up to in as far as, you know, the first group of, you know, volunteers or whatever you call them that are putting themselves forward to be sent to this place? Like, where are we up to in that process? Has anyone started yet?
Yeah, well, actually, I mean, I kind of sit on the sidelines in the sense that I'm not kind of actively recruiting. So please don't email me asking if you can realize anybody who's watching, because I get a lot of emails, people saying I want to be part of it. But there are actually, it's, you know, I wrote this paper with Rick in 2016, so a couple of years ago now, 2015 maybe. 2016, 2 years ago now, just as an idea, kind of a proof of principle that would say, okay, would this possibly work? You know, are what I think these properties of DMT did they actually make sense? Did they actually work when you actually build the model and analyze the blood data and stuff? And it seemed to be the case. So we published this paper, and it obviously got a lot of interest from people who were, you know, this idea that this new technology that could plug us into this DMT space for a long time. But at that point, I wasn't actively, and I don't have money to be running research programs like this. And if you go to some kind of research council who give grants and say, look, I want to plug people into DMT hyperspace for three hours. Can I have $1 million, please? That's not going to happen, I'm afraid. Or 100 billion yen or something like that. It's certainly not going to happen. So I kind of sat back and watched this kind of unfold. I mean, I was interested really in other things as well, and writing this book and doing, the kind of the thinking side of things. But in the meantime, a number of people have kind of taken up the mantle and actually said, we are going to do this. And they've come from a number of perspectives. So from a purely academic perspective, the group at Imperial College in London. So this is the most important psychedelic research group in the world, I would say. Certainly in terms of studying the effects of psychedelics on brain function in awake human beings, right? Not on animals or whatever, but actually in human beings. These MRI studies have been groundbreaking. They've done with psilocybin initially back in 2012, and then LSD, which is a huge paper, and then now they're doing DMT. And they are now looking at using this technology to basically allow them to study, to hold someone in the DMT space, not so that they can establish communication with extra dimensional entities, but so that they can actually, allow them to do more. To basically facilitate their experiments that they do. So that's one way to do it, is the purely academic, objective, kind of orthodox scientific approach, neuroscientific approach. And then there's a group in Boulder. So this group, led by Dan McQueen, where I spoke last year, and I mean, he kind of emailed me, and he picked up the paper, and he's really, really run with it. I mean, it's remarkable. He sent me an email not long ago, actually, just giving some of the update. And he does have a team of volunteers. He has a training camp kind of thing, where they go on a retreat, and he's really taking it seriously, even down to actually sourcing the intravenous infusion machinery. And we've got an MD on board, which of course you're not going to get permission to do this kind of stuff without an MD on board, and all of this stuff. So he's really gone with it. He's, in terms of our original vision, my original vision, not necessarily so much Rick's. I can't speak for Rick, not here, but my original vision of actually using this technology as a technology for establishing extended communication with these entities, using our best apparatus. They are the closest to actually achieving it, but they still got a lot of hurdles to get over. There's no doubt about it. But good on them. Even if they ultimately fail, and I hope they don't, they would have beaten a lot of the path in order to actually getting this kind of work done. And then there are some other people as well that have thought about it, and I occasionally get emails from people saying, they're thinking about developing this technology. But I would say Dan McQueen's group is the one who's really taking it serious from this kind of science fiction almost perspective, and then other people from a more academic perspective. That's where we are. But I'm kind of watching from the sidelines. I give advice, I consult, I offer my opinions, but I'm not actively recruiting people.
With so much going on with artificial intelligence, like virtual reality, augmented reality, all this stuff that's going on, we're having a look at what the possibilities could be for the future with all of that, transhumanism even. And then there's this that no one's really in the mainstream thinking about. I mean, what would you consider to be like a breakthrough in this? Like, I mean, if the ultimate thing happened and some sort of full-on contact was made, I mean, this could totally change everything in a way that it's like difficult to even understand overnight.
Yeah, it's difficult for me to I don't. I sometimes think, what would be what would be that key piece of evidence that would convince the difficult to convince that this really was communication with extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional intelligences beyond this reality, and people have thought about that, and for example, posing them very, very difficult mathematical problem, factoring, finding that prime factors are very, very large numbers, for example. Presumably these beings are so intelligent they can do that very, very simply. Why they would want to, I don't know. But so, you can think of ways that one might exclude the possibility that it was just your own brain that was making it up or hallucinating it or something like that. But there are other people that say, well, the reality of these intelligences is unimportant. It's more what have they got to tell us? And it's kind of a red herring to talk about, the ontological status of these things. So yeah, I think it's hard to predict what would happen, depending on the kind of information that we got back, and that these initial kind of pioneering voyages would actually bring back, and what would that look like? I don't think anyone really knows what it would look like to spend several days in this DMT space, or even to transfer oneself there permanently. What would happen? What would happen? There's many sort of things you have to consider. I mean, one can envision a time when the Earth is barren and a wasteland because we've destroyed it. It's all cooked, and everyone's kind of hooked up to these machines, and they're basically permanently plugged into this DMT space. That's very, very science fiction and all, very dystopian, nightmarish in a sense. But that could be the end game. That could be our route out, not only our route off away from Earth, but actually our route away from this kind of very, very clunky and heavy and very difficult to maneuver and very fragile three-dimensional matter, this kind of this meat that we inhabit, that this intelligence inhabits. Maybe that's the way out of it. And I've in my book I talk about this idea that fundamentally everything is really constructed from information fundamentally, and that includes our brain, that includes the world constructed by our brain. And essentially what happens when you smoke DMT is that your brain, which is really a lower dimensional slice of a higher dimensional processor, actually becomes like a higher dimensional brain complex. It actually becomes part of this high dimensional reality. And I think it would be possible, perhaps, in the DMT space, for actually them to reconstruct your brain complex, or the informational structure of your brain complex, in this high dimensional space. So that would mean essentially that you would become one of the DMT entities. You would enter that space irreversibly and permanently. You would become one of the thronging elfin crowds that kind of welcomed people from the crazy kind of three-dimensional world occasionally. That's kind of this transcription of the brain complex into this space is something that might be part of the game, part of that end game, that we're not intended. This is really, this universe is like a way of culturing conscious intelligences, diverse conscious intelligences. And there's no doubt many, many conscious intelligences peppered throughout this universe. And so our universe is kind of like a petri dish. I don't think we weren't created. I'm not a creationist by any stretch of the imagination. But I think, if you wanted to construct universes, and basically by having basically generating very, very large numbers of universes with very, very slightly different rules, fundamental rules, like a fundamental rule set at the ground of reality. This really comes from kind of the ideas of digital physics, digital philosophy. And if you were to basically simulate all possible universes, and some of them would grind down to homogeneity, some would descend into a tumult of endless chaos, and nothing interesting would happen. But just a very, very small few, you would start to get complex structures emerging. And from them, eventually, you would get living being, this hierarchy of complexity up to the point of us now. So we are basically at that stage now where we are kind of grown. We have developed now where we are ready, essentially, to be transferred into the DMT space. And DMT is that message. That's the tool that's been left for us. And we just have to learn how to use it. And we are very, very close now. So in a sense, one can see this continuous IV technology as being the final covenant, the last step in the great work of any species, to actually leave the confines, the dimensional constraints of this reality, this petri dish, and into this higher dimensional space. That's just speculation, of course.
So if like you were explaining in one of your videos, with Conway's Game of Life being layered like just a flat, going one layer on top of the other layer, you're saying that we're possibly could be on the verge of becoming those 3D blue squares?
Right, exactly, yeah. So I use this Conway's Game of Life and these more generally these cellular automata. So for those not familiar, I should probably explain what we're talking about. So a cellular automata is basically a grid. Actually, at its most fundamental, it's not. But anyway, it's normally visualized as a grid of squares, which can be normally in one of two states, either black or white, alive or dead. And it's a zero-player game. So basically, the game updates the state of every square in parallel based upon the states of squares in the neighborhood of a particular square. So for example, if a square is in a black state and it's surrounded by, so you've got 8 neighbors in the Game of Life, basically the 8 squares surrounding it. If they are in a particular configuration, then the square will remain black. Otherwise, it might change to white. So there's a rule set. So the Game of Life exemplifies cellular automata in that you have a set of elements, in this case, kind of these squares of the grid, that can be in one of a discrete finite number of states. In the Game of Life, just 2. I mean, most cellular automata only 2, the simplest to compute. And then there's a rule set, what's called a transition rule set, which basically dictates how the state of the square will update with each time step. And the Game of Life is special because most cellular automata you set up that way. There's only a limited number of kind of rule sets of what you can use. What is the pattern of neighborhood cells that will cause a cell to either change its state or remain in its current state? There's a limited but very large number of possible rule sets. Most of these don't display particularly interesting behavior. So most will either become either homogeneous or with a kind of very, very simple static pattern, or they will kind of descend into this chaotic activity that never settles. But some sit at what's known as the edge of chaos, which is this narrow band between order and chaos. And it's only within this narrow band that complex structures can emerge and maintain themselves. And so with the Game of Life, what happens, you see these structures kind of emerge, that move across the screen, that break apart, that emit other structures, that then interact with others, and they join together and form larger, more complex structures. And so the game it's called the Game of Life because it appears like a very primitive form of life. It's not life, but it displays many of the characteristics of living organisms. Living organisms are hierarchically organized complex systems, starting from the lowest level of organization, a lower level of molecules and cells that then self-organize to form organs, self-organize to form organ systems, that self-organize to form the complete organism. And so humans and all life seems to sit at this narrow band between order and chaos. Life has to be ordered, but it can't be crystalline, perfect order. Otherwise, it could never respond to its environment, never adapt. It could never, it could never be considered living, never reproduce, and all that kind of stuff. Respond to its environment, but also it can't be completely chaotic, or that it has to maintain itself. So life, real life, true life, like something living like us, seems to also sit within this narrow band of between order and chaos, the age of chaos. And so the game of life is a good way of looking at how complex systems emerge. And what's nice about the game of life is it's a simple two-dimensional system, but you can actually illustrate lots of kind of concepts in terms of the way information complexifies and self-organizes to form higher order structures, the way that information can be restricted to the two dimensions of the game of life, or you can stack these cellular automata, you create a three-dimensional system, and that can be seen as either a stack of 2D slices, or it could be seen as a three-dimensional system, dependent upon the rule set, and dependent upon whether information can enter a 2D slice from the orthogonal third dimension. All these kind of things that I use to actually explain my thinking about what might be happening with DMT, in that DMT suddenly allows us to receive information from an orthogonal dimension. So, for example, if you're one of these slices in the game of this stack of games of life, you're never going to know that you're part of a three-dimensional system, because you're only ever receiving information from the 8 cells, the 8 squares of the grid that are surrounding you. You need to change the rule set in order to allow information to enter from above and below, and people have done this. These three-dimensional versions of the game of life do exist, and you can do this in as many number of dimensions as you want. Now, I'm not saying that the ground of reality is something as simple, but it might well be as simple, but I don't think it's trivial to actually work out what the rule set would be. But many people have, and many people take this idea quite seriously, that the ground of reality is fundamentally digital, and that you have these kind of fundamental elements of reality. They might be little cubes of space. They might be something much more abstract. If you're Ed Fredkin, who was really one of the founders of this nascent field of physics, digital physics, or digital philosophy, as he calls it, he suggests that it's little cubes of space, perhaps. But other people have suggested actually this is much more abstract. Like Max Tegmark. He's not a digital physicist as such, but he thinks we live in a kind of a mathematical universe, and the true structure of reality is purely mathematical. So even if you take this idea of a ground of reality as fundamentally digital, it might not be little cubes of space, but it could be something much, much more abstract. But the idea is that fundamentally, if the ground of reality would have some basic fundamental element, it could be a transistor and a computer chip, it could be a bit of binary code or whatever. But it would have a number of discrete states, and it would update its state based upon certain rules. And then from these fundamental rule set would emerge the observable physics of our universe, in the same way that the behavior of the game of life, the rules of Conway's game of life, are essentially the physics of its universe. But they would emerge through layers of organization to the observable physics that we see, in the way that so-called fundamental particles interact and form large structures, all of that kind of stuff. But the very, very deep, deep ground of reality, way, way deeper than strings or whatever, would be this absolutely fundamental digital structure, which would mean basically the universe is computing itself. And so this naturally makes one think that, is the universe generated by some sort of code? Now, there's a computer scientist called Jürgen Schmidhuber, who suggests that, claims that if the universe is computable, it's going to be much easier to compute all possible universes than it is to try and compute a universe where the rules are correct, such that you get complex structures emerging. And this is often called the fine-tuning problem in cosmology. Why are the fundamental constants so finely tuned? If they're out by 0.001% or something, galaxies could never form. It's crazy things like that. So Schmidhuber says, what you would do if the universe is fundamentally computable is you would actually generate all possible universes, then allow them to run. Then some of them you would see very, very early on nothing interesting is happening, and some you would say, these are good contenders, something interesting might happen. So we could be in one of those. And then, so we are literally being cultured. You can imagine all of these slices of this high dimensional space. Within each, you've got a different universe, what I call the grid, a different grid kind of running with slightly different rules. And we find ourselves in one where, things have gone quite far. And we are emergent in one of these universe variants. And so, we become kind of candidates for transcription, perhaps, into that space from whence we were encoded. That's a possibility, and so DMT might be that technology that's embedded for candidates for this game, essentially.
And does anyone know how or what drives these patterns, like the glider guns that we see? Like, how do the cells intelligently organize by themselves to make these
they don't
patterns?
organize. This is the key point. Is that the rules are very, very simple. In that a single cell, all it does, each cell, and when we talk about cell, we talk about a square. Each square of this grid does only one thing. It knows its current state. It doesn't know it, but it has a current state, and it looks at the squares around it. And based upon the number of black cells, for example, or the number of white cells, or their arrangement, it goes, okay, I'm going to stay in my current state, or I'm going to change to the other state. That's it. And so you have very, very simple rules, and you get complex, self-organized emergent behavior. This is, quite astounding, and sort of explains many phenomena that we see in the real world. This idea of having systems that self-organize, that have many, many components. So in the game of life, each component or each agent is one of these squares on this grid, whereas in the real world, we might see an ant society. And each ant interacts with the other ants in very simple ways, according to very, very simple rules, based upon chemical signaling or visual signals, all this kind of stuff. And yet from that emerges this highly complex ant society. The queen ant isn't dictating and telling ants, they need to do this, they need to do this. And the ants, they're not highly intelligent species, but they kind of self-organize from these very, very simple rules. And you can also see this with murmurations of starlings, for example. You see these flocks of birds in the sky. If you look up in the autumn sky at dusk, it's just astonishing. You see these videos, and they reconfigure, and it's incredible kind of behavior. And people have asked, how do these birds know how to do this? And the reason these flocks form is not because every bird knows what it's doing or knows, kind of what the purpose is of the flock, in a sense, because then the flock would fail. If everyone is trying to do their thing, looking around, it's never going to work. Certainly not with a creature with a brain the size of a bird. But what all the bird has to do is follow a few very, very simple rules. It looks at the bird in front of it. It looks at the bird aside. It tries to maintain a certain heading. It tries to maintain a certain distance between the other birds. And when it does that, the flock self-organizes. So you get this information kind of flows from the level of the individual birds to cause this higher level informational structure, this higher level dynamic structure and behavior to emerge. That's not programmed into the birds any more than this complex ant society is programmed into the individual ant. It emerges at a higher level from these very, very simple rules. And so that then gives you an idea of, this kind of makes sense now. We struggle to understand, and we're sometimes even driven to creationism because we can't understand how can something as intricate and beautiful as a single human cell, a single living, an amoeba or a bacterium or something, all of these complex functions. What we don't realize is that complexity can arise often from very, very large numbers of very, very simple interactions. And you can often get very, very complex and dynamic and responsive emergent behavior at these high levels. So that's it really. It's not, these cells are not in the game of life, these squares, they're not intelligent at all. And yet you can imagine layers of complexity emerging from the basic simple structures to give rise to something intelligent. And I believe that we are the pinnacle of this process of hierarchical self-organization and complexification. So, in the game of life, it's very, very simple. You're only ever really going to see 1 or 2 levels of organization. You talk about gliders. Yeah, interesting, but, 5 cells. And then you've got, more complex structures, spaceships that move around. Really amazing. These structures maintain themselves. But again, it's really only a couple of levels of organization. But then in more realistic systems, you can imagine that these structures then can interact. So you get structures that self-organize from lower order structures to form a kind of what you might call a first order structure. That then they interact. They form a more complex structure that has different kind of properties and behaviors. And then they start interacting. And then, you, at every layer, you're getting new behavior. This is emergent behavior that cannot be reduced to behavior going on at the lower level. And then, through layers and layers of this complexification, you arrive at this thinking, intelligent being that kind of constructs a model of reality for itself and is thinking about communicating with alternate dimensions. But I think fundamentally it goes right down, right at the ground of reality. There's something very, very simple going on, and it's possible that it could have been encoded, and it's possible that it could have been encoded by beings that are not from this universe. I'm not talking about God. I'm talking about beings that are basically essentially trying to cultivate a variety of conscious intelligences using this method of constructing large numbers of variants and then basically running them and seeing what happens, and then choosing perhaps some to communicate by leaving some sort of message, which would be this DMT.
Wow, this stuff is so unbelievably fascinating. I want to be respectful of your time, Andrew. I mean, if we don't start wrapping up, we'll be here till the morning because I just won't let you go. Now, where can people log into your website and punch in an email address or something to keep up to date with the book that's coming out? Because I definitely want to support you on that. Chase and I, my wife, will definitely be getting the book.
There it is. So Alien Information Theory. So this is due out in, I hope, by the end of February. That's my deadline. And if you go to www.buildingalienworlds.com, all one word, buildingalienworlds.com, then there is a tab which is book, and you can actually leave your email address, and then I will update you when the book comes out, and then you will have a choice. You can either order it via Amazon or whatever, or if you want, you can order it via me, and I will sign it and write a little message for you if you want, that kind of thing. Yeah, so that's where everybody can go.
Excellent. So that's www.buildingalienworlds.com. We'll be definitely hooking up with you again, Andrew, before the book comes out, and we'll be definitely getting some people to buy that book. It's going to be absolutely fascinating. I can't wait to read it. I really appreciate you giving your time tonight.
You're absolutely welcome. It's been a blast. Thank you very much.
No worries, Andrew. We'll see you on the next one.
All right. Thank you very much.
Bye for now. Thank you.